The other day I heard about somebody whose name is very well known in certain political circles talking about why she didn't believe in God, and yet she thought that it was probably a good thing that people do believe in God for the sake of the body politic. And she referred to Hamilton and Jefferson, and the founding fathers felt that, and so did Alexis de Tocqueville and various observers from centuries past felt that the American system really depends on a belief in a supreme moral being to make it all work. And so many people, including this famous commentator, agree with that we just can't survive as a republic if we have no metaphysical underpinning, and yet she personally cannot believe in God because of the suffering that she perceives around us all, and it's undeserved suffering. She said that even people who are much better than I are suffering much more than I do, and I just don't see how a good God would allow that to happen. When I came across those remarks, I thought about Albert Camus' play Caligula, which I'll cite in just a few minutes. But Caligula the play is not about the despotic Roman emperor, the lunatic who murdered people left and right for a few months until he himself was put to death. Camus wasn't trying to be historical in his play. He was trying to project an image of the existential man who discovers that life is absurd. His Caligula says, men die and they're not happy. And to Camus, this is the essence of, and I think this woman too that I'm talking about, this is the essence of her frustration with God. That how can there be a God if people know that they have a death sentence when they begin this life, and for a lot of other reasons too. It's not even like they go from cradle to grave and are relatively healthy and unhurt and live in a just world and have enough to eat and all that. The people just suffer terribly, and sometimes the best people suffer the most. It was Menander who said, "On hoi philoi philus in apothneske neos." He whom the gods love dies young. And that seems to be a kind of a classical sentiment, that if you're lucky, life is just so full of terrible things that if you're lucky, you'll get out of it early. And this is from people who don't even believe in an afterlife. So the best you have to hope from life is that you'll die young. I want to do this in two parts because it's such a complex issue. It really, you can talk about this for years, but just let me quickly make a few points about this. I've talked about this in a previous video, but I noted that in my own life, I've made the acquaintance of suffering of a certain kind that I'm not going to try to compare my misery with that of people who really suffer, but I do think I have had certain kinds of experience that people of our intellectual class do not know. There was a period in my 20s when I went several months living on breakfast alone. That was my daily meal. And if I got lucky, I could open up a cold can of macaroni in the afternoon. But I got so exhausted physiologically that I also contracted a bad case of flu. This was in Europe, and some of the people were actually dying of this flu. So I feel like I kind of was lucky to make it through that. But it's interesting to me that, and I believe that this is true of other people who kind of live on the edge in that respect. We really shut down, it's like a submarine that is trying to escape detection, and they shut down everything, just a very bare minimum of lights and electricity enough to keep operating. That's what your body does when you're in that kind of situation. You shut everything down that you possibly can, and you just focus on little things like, getting up and getting dressed and doing your bathroom duties and so forth. Every little piddly thing that you do is a little success. And you don't think about, oh, I'm in such pain. I'm so hungry. Life is so miserable. You're just going up little bitty steps up this little short staircase that takes you from today to tomorrow. And so I think that people like this woman who is very successful, very well educated, very wealthy, sort of born with a silver spoon in her mouth. I'm not being critical, but I'm just saying that those of us who look at the misery around us, and she emphasized that these are better people than I am, and they suffer so much more than I do. And I respect that kind of compassion for others that have less, but it seems to me that we almost romanticize that away, or maybe it's the reverse of romanticize. We make it worse because it's something that we don't know, and we feel like if we make it just unendurably painful, then at least we show that we're not pampered little twits who are too far above the misery to feel how bad it is. People who actually go through misery are the most likely to believe in a higher power. Interestingly, it's the other people with the silver spoon in their mouths who seem not to believe in the higher power. And I think that's very interesting. It shows that, we have this kind of need to show sympathy, to show solidarity with those who have less, but we don't really know how to do it. And this kind of gets into that whole subject of virtue signaling. I don't think this woman was trying to do that, but maybe unconsciously she sort of was. Let me just put it this way. It's not really the material misery that makes people not believe in God. As I say, I think that even makes people believe more in God. It's intellectual reflection upon the misery of life that makes people turn away from God. It's not the actual sufferers, it's those that are kind of in the grandstands perceiving the suffering. And they're the ones who have trouble processing it in their whole worldview. There's just, it really is. There's so much pain, and it's just natural pain, a lot of it. Death, of course. I'm going to talk about in the second part, though, I'm going to leave the pain and the death and the disease and the natural things that occur. That's kind of a different kettle of fish. I'm going to wrap this one up just by talking about the other things, the injustice, being incarcerated or executed because you happen to say the wrong thing. There's so many evil things like that in our world today. I think it's worse than it's ever been. I don't think the despotic king of the past would, with the exception of people like Caligula, but even Caligula didn't really care what farmers and shoemakers and such like were saying about him. His ravages mostly took place in the context of his court. So we really find that most of the bad things that aren't natural that happen to people in this world are a product of sin. And sin plunges you into a religious discussion. Let me kind of summarize. Look at it this way. I have this all written down because it's not really complicated, but it's sort of circuitous. It's a tortuous path. You start out with people, some, especially younger people, and some people who are maybe more brutish in a way. They just live for physical pleasure, and so this leads to riotous behavior, I'll call it. And if you go down that road, you soon discover, with the wine, women, and song and everything, that you got to have money. You have to have resources to live that sort of life. And money forces you to seek the next level up of sin. You have sins of the flesh, and then you have sins of the spirit. You get into power when you need resources. You have to apply your mind, have to be a more intellectual sinner. You have to figure out how you're going to get the wherewithal to continue being decadent. And when you become more powerful, that also opens up a new range of pleasures that you never knew before when you were just boozing and chasing girls. You discover that people praise you, or they fear you, or they admire you, or they say they admire you, they worship you, they are sycophants, and maybe you enjoy that. That's a whole new sort of pleasure that your ego feeds on, and you just get bigger and bigger, and yet, as a human being, you discover sooner or later that all of that adulation, all of these flatterers surrounding you, all of the people waiting on you, the palace that you live in, gold and silver everywhere, that's not enough either. You're still not happy. And it's terribly frustrating. And I think a lot of human beings at this point shift into a really sinister, almost a kind of satanic gear where they want to annihilate. They want to punish. It's almost like they want to punish God. They want to. They hate life. They have everything that anyone could possibly have, and they still aren't happy. And it makes them furious inside. So they want to take it out on life. They destroy. They devastate. It's a sort of vengeance. Or now you can also have people going in the other direction, and that seems to be more benign for a while, but I think in some ways this is more sinister. They decide, well, because the world is such just a big load of crap, you know what? I have the power, I have the resources, and I'm going to stand back and just take, it's going to be like a lump of clay in my hands. I'm going to take it and remake the whole thing. If there were a God, boy, he sure made a mess of it, but there wasn't a God, so hey, I'll be God, and I'll step in and make this world the way it should have been. And so then they start making what, we had these things called ant farms when I was a kid, where you had these two little slivers of glass, and you put dirt in between them, and you put in the ants, and you could see their little tunnels from the two glass panels. And this is sort of like making a human ant farm. I'm going to take all these millions of little people and design the perfect society for them. They're going to get in there. They're going to stay in there. They're going to go where I put them, or else I just, take them in my fingers and mash them and throw them away. But if they'll just do what I say, it's going to be a nice, orderly community. And that's what God would have made if there had been a God. So I'm going to play God myself. Everything I've just talked about, starting from maybe not including the riotous behavior, because that's living at the animal level, but everything beyond that, where you start using your intellect and you start collecting resources, and then you start engaging in this sort of brooding about still not being happy. But what you're doing there is all a result of not acknowledging God's existence and trying to live life without God, or even trying to replace God, trying to put yourself on God's throne. And the people who suffer, I'm not saying they're doing this, but they're often the victims of people, well, always in this world, the victims of people who are engaging in sinful behavior. So that aspect of life's misery, at least, is God didn't cause that. We caused that by not even acknowledging that God is there. Okay, here's a quick, as I close, here's what Caligula is saying toward the end of the play. He says, there must be two kinds of happiness, and I've chosen the murderous kind. For I am happy. There was a time when I thought I'd reached the extremity of pain, but no, one can go farther yet. Beyond the limit of pain lies a splendid, sterile happiness. Look at me. Then he goes on for a while, and he says, I had love when Drusilla was alive, but I lost her, and I was just devastated for a while. And then I realized if she had lived and we'd grown old together, I would have gotten bored, and that would have been even worse, because I would have realized that it's futile. It all comes to nothing. Even love doesn't last. Nothing lasts. He says, I know what I'm saying. This freedom that I found, it's made me content. Thanks to it, I've won the godlike enlightenment of the solitary. I live, I kill, I exercise the rapturous power of a destroyer, compared with which the power of a creator is merest child's play. And this is happiness. Well, I've gone on long enough, but I think Camus very well captures the essence of the corrupt kind of human being who's tried with his intellect to supply the void that exists when God is removed. And, it doesn't end up, in spite of what he says here, it doesn't really end up making him happy at all. It drives him insane. And it sure ends up making everyone else around him infinitely more miserable than they would have been just from natural disease and eventual death. So, hey, that's one side of the question to consider. I'll continue this.